Number 4. The Breakup. As depicted in the 1997 film depicting the Titanic disaster, the historic ship broke into two pieces as it sank into the icy water of the Atlantic Ocean. But new discoveries made by researchers suggest that instead of just two pieces, the Titanic actually split into multiple pieces. A naval architect named Roger Long analyzed the ship's hull that was first discovered resting on the seafloor in 1985. When he was interviewed by NBC News, he explained that when the bottom section of the Titanic's hull broke loose, the stern and bow split as well. He said that since the stern was still buoyant, it filled up with survivors but eventually sank into the ocean just 5 minutes after the rest of the boat. Researchers before had no reason to suspect that the ship broke into more than two pieces, but after sonar imaging of the wreck site was carried out by underwater robots in 2010, new details were revealed. The robots were owned by the RMS Titanic Inc, an organization set on preserving the famous ship's legacy. The company also conducted over 8 recovery and research expeditions to the Titanic wreck since it was first identified at the bottom of the ocean. The team from RMS Titanic Inc. mapped 15 square miles of the ocean floor using sonar technology, which showed them images of the deteriorating ship. They found marks along the bottom of the seafloor suggesting that the stern likely rotated similarly to that of a helicopter blade as it sank. The vessel fell at a considerable speed for about 2.5 miles before the hull plunged deep into the sand. But the researchers determined that the bow of the ship drifted straight downwards, landing pretty gently on the seabed. The sections of the Titanic's hull, roughly 40 by 90 feet in length, were found in great condition considering the circumstances, and the red paint that covered the bottom part of the ship was still clearly visible. Based on research done on the shipwreck, we now know that the Titanic actually split up into 4 sections: the bow, stern, and the hull, which broke in half. This would have allowed water to seep in more quickly than what was previously believed. According to the new findings, the Titanic sank into the ocean way faster than historians originally thought. David Brown, a Titanic expert, estimated that it took about 20 minutes for the ship to get completely submerged in the water, but as it turns out, everything happened even quicker. By utilizing the sonar map of the shipwreck, investigators are now able to answer questions that were once thought impossible to explain. Now that they can clearly see exactly where every piece of the ship ended up, they can put together an accurate explanation as to what really happened. Computer-generated simulations have also been utilized to reenact the sinking of the Titanic and can even play the events in reverse. The simulation of the ship accurately shows the entire wreck, allowing investigators to understand every fatal flaw in the Titanic's design. The virtual reassembly of the boat was first shown off to the public in the History Channel's documentary that aired on April 15, 2012, the 100-year anniversary of the ship's sinking. Number 3. The Mysterious Captain Smith. The mysterious whereabouts of the ship's captain, Edward Smith, has been highly debated since the Titanic first sank in 1912. There have been many eyewitness accounts from survivors claiming to have seen Captain Smith doing all kinds of things as the ship went down. But none of these claims seem to match up with stories from passengers, leaving several questions unanswered. Many survivors claim to have seen Smith jumping overboard before the ship submerged in the water. But there are other reports from people who supposedly saw the captain roaming the streets of Baltimore months after the tragedy happened. There are even some passengers who say they witnessed Smith shoot himself with a pistol shortly after being told of the ship's impending demise. The captain seems to have been reported in multiple places at once, which is not possible, so getting to the bottom of this mystery proved difficult for many investigators to solve. One of the first visual accounts of Smith before the Titanic completely sank was around 11:40 p.m. According to William Murdoch, the captain's first officer, he informed Smith of the collision with the infamous iceberg when they met on the bridge. This is allegedly when the captain and his crew started to understand the severity of the damage done. They reportedly came up with a plan for an emergency evacuation of the Titanic's passengers, but after this rendezvous with Murdoch, the captain's whereabouts became unclear. As the popular saying says, the captain goes down with his ship, but surprisingly, Smith's body was never found in the wreckage. and there is no definitive record of his death being confirmed. It seems that many have accepted the theory that he simply died with the other passengers as the vessel was submerged. Without evidence to prove or disprove this assumption, it's clear why there is so much mystery surrounding the Titanic's captain. After Smith was informed of the iceberg, the fourth officer under his command, Joseph G. Boxhall, incorrectly reported that no damage was done to the ship, a mistake that would soon be proven horribly wrong. Boxhall's words were almost immediately contradicted by Thomas Andrews, the ship's head designer, who told Captain Smith that 5 of the vessel's lower deck compartments had already been filled with water. This was a troubling statement, since the unsinkable Titanic was not equipped to stay above water if more than 4 of the compartments were flooded. The entire incident was reported to have happened within 20 short minutes, since the boat was apparently traveling at breakneck speed, much faster than it should have been. Only after water started spilling into the lower sections of the ship did Captain Smith tell passengers they were sinking. He declared that everyone on board had just 90 minutes to find a way off the vessel as water trickled in. But where was Smith during all of this chaos? Paul Louden-Brown, a maritime historian, claims to have seen the captain acting heroically while doing everything in his power to help passengers into lifeboats, prioritizing women and children first. But there are others who portray Smith's actions as ineffective and inactive during the panic. Even Brown confirms that the captain was letting lifeboats leave well under their maximum capacity. They were able to hold at least 65 people, but were being lowered into the water with just 27. Surviving crew members reported that Smith never even issued an abandoned ship order, which was customary under the circumstances, and most likely contributed to the large quantity of deaths that resulted from the tragedy. According to several eyewitness accounts, Captain Smith was visibly traumatized and in complete shock, which definitely could have impaired his decision-making abilities during the evacuation attempts. John Graves, a fireman who survived the disaster, said that Smith seemingly vanished into the ether amidst the ship's last hours, and he also failed to give out vital information to officers and crew. As people were being boarded onto lifeboats, several bridge officers were blissfully unaware of the severity of the situation after the collision. Given that there are so many contradicting accounts, it's nearly impossible to say for certain what Smith was doing in the Titanic's final moments. But the captain apparently told his crew that it's every man for himself after finishing his final tour of the deck. Then, at approximately 2:10 a.m., the captain supposedly made an announcement with a megaphone for passengers to look out for themselves before he made his way to the bridge by himself, according to steward Edward Brown. Just 5 minutes later, the entire boat was swallowed by the sea, and mysteriously, Smith's body was never found. It seems like we may never know the full truth regarding Captain Smith's final whereabouts and his last moments of life, and until his body is discovered, or more information is released on the Titanic tragedy, this mystery will likely remain unsolved. What do you think happened to Captain Edward Smith? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 2. The Six. One of the last scenes from the Titanic movie shows Jack Dawson slowly sinking into the chilly water as Rose desperately waits to be rescued by a lifeboat. But as it turns out, this was incredibly inaccurate. James Cameron, the film's director, actually based this scene on real events that happened to the last person rescued from the wreckage. This passenger was named Wing Sun Fong, one of only 6 Chinese passengers that survived the tragedy. While investigators gathered reports from the survivors of the Titanic in the years following the sinking, almost nothing was known about these 6 men. But over 110 years after the sinking of the ship, the true stories of these passengers were finally uncovered. A documentary called The Six aired in 2021 and was produced and directed by Tong Luo. Luo's vision for the documentary was to find out exactly what happened to the 6 Chinese survivors, since it seemed like they vanished after being rescued. Records regarding the men are few and far between, and even if Luo's team was given a name of the surviving passengers, they were all written in English. This means that the possible pronunciation of the names would have represented dozens of Chinese characters and would have led to an endless list of men that may not have even been on the Titanic at all. Because of this, One of the 6 survivors was left unidentified in the documentary, a man named Fu Qiong, who was listed on the ship's registry. Additionally, these men were sent to another ship called the Annetta right after being rescued, according to one researcher named Cynthia Lee. This ship, apparently designated for the Chinese survivors, sailed to Cuba after the Titanic tragedy. This fact added yet another layer of difficulty to Luo's investigation. Sadly, surviving the sinking of the ship was not the greatest obstacle these men were forced to overcome in their lives. Throughout World War I, Chinese laborers traveled to Britain in order to fill the gaps left by local workers, many of whom went to battle. But the British government sent many Chinese seamen back to Asia after the war was finished due to economic downfall and labor redundancy. In the documentary, they explain that after landing in Cuba, 3 of the survivors went back to the UK. One of the men, Cheng Chip, unfortunately got pneumonia in 1914 and passed away in Britain. 2 of the others were identified as He Ling and Ah Lam, both of whom continued to work in the UK until 1920 when they were deported. Mysteriously, the men disappeared after boarding British ships going back to Asia. Situations like this arose in Canada and America as well. Another one of the Chinese survivors was named Bing Li. It's believed that he ended up in Canada where he opened his own coffee shop. The last passenger rescued from the Titanic, the man that's said to have inspired James Cameron, was named Feng Lang. But he'd changed his identity for immigration purposes, so when Luo contacted the man's living residence, he learned the survivor had 3 names in total: Lang Fang, Sen Fang, and Wing Sun Fong, his legal name. Fong apparently traveled to the US to become a merchant, and in the process, he cut off all ties to his motherland to become integrated and accepted in the new country. Many of the man's relatives were not even aware he had survived the Titanic, since most of his life was kept secret to avoid discrimination. This would have contributed to there being little to no documentation of these men after the Titanic tragedy. Number 1. SOS. On April 15, 1972, Lloyd Detmer, a radio operator on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, received a strange SOS signal. Apparently, through his headphones, he heard a man calling out for someone to help in the sinking of the Titanic, an event that had happened exactly 60 years before. Detmer believed that this was an impractical and possibly sick joke, but out of curiosity, he began an investigation. Interestingly, while searching through military archives, he began to notice a pattern of similar signals received by other radio operators. In 1918, 1924, 1930, 1936, and 1942, the same strange SOS signals were reported. Based on this research, he concluded that the phantom crew of the Titanic was reaching out for help every 6 years. As he read through the radiograms documented by his colleagues, he realized that all of them claimed to have heard the voice of the Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, desperately calling out for rescue assistance. Making this strange discovery seemed to take a toll on Detmer, and after he ended his investigation, he was even treated for neurosis in Baltimore at a military clinic. But paranormal researchers latched onto this phenomenon and have come up with their own twisted theories regarding the tragedy. They claim the souls of the 1,500 victims who perished during the sinking of the Titanic have been caught in a temporal loop and are forced to relive the catastrophe every 6 years. But luckily, this is all just based on speculation, and the last time the mysterious signal was received was in 1996 by the Quebec ship. If these men and women were caught in some type of time loop, they seem to finally be resting at peace. Would you rather visit the Titanic shipwreck on a diving expedition or see a museum full of artifacts from the wreck? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.